So I think there's a very high chance this is legitimate battlefield footage, showing men going over the top, probably in an attack around Guinchy or Guillemont, two villages that were attacked by the King's Own Scottish borderers in the middle to latter part of the Battle of the Somme. Hi guys, I'm Dan Hill, a professional military historian specialising in the history of the First World War on the Western Front. Today we're going to delve into the archives and investigate raw, unedited battlefield footage from the 1916 Battle of the Somme. So let's get straight into it. So this footage we see here actually comes from the National Archives in the United States. Silent film at this time, right up until the 1960s. Also had the soundtrack added afterwards. So this would have originally been designed to have been played with music, with literally somebody playing a piano as accompaniment. I've got a great first shot straight away here. Just going to pause on that for a second, because this is a kind of classic late autumn, early winter 1916 shot, which we know works with the broader context of this piece. This is part of what we know as the Battle of the Ancre film. So the Battle of the Ancre takes place in November of 1916, but there's footage a little bit either side of that timestamp, but this looks about right. And you can see here British troops. It's of course a British film. This is showing artillerymen, as we can see from the gun in the background here. And these guys are wearing these woolly coats, woolly jackets, sometimes known as woolly stinkers, because they, well, to be honest, they stank pretty quickly. They also got extremely heavy when wet, but they're designed to give troops just a little bit more warmth, particularly around their core. So this is a good example of men eating rations somewhere near an artillery battery, really enjoying the experience. Actually, you know, this is a good example. You see a lot of people smiling here, which goes against this idea of people having fun on the Somme. What we should remember is a lot of these guys are young, you know, they're average age of 26.2, and they're out with their mates in a very dangerous but albeit quite exciting environment. And you know, you can see that in shots like this. Famous rations coming up the line. This is probably food here. So the caption said water, but these are probably guys bringing up food rations. This certainly would be water though. Let's just pause on this shot for a second. These are the famous British Army fuel cans, which is really used for a bit of everything in the Great War. British troops in particular, would very often grumble about the fact that the water that's been brought up in the can on that particular day must have had fuel in it the day before, or something else the day before that, because that water always tended to have a little bit of a taste of petrol, which was not particularly agreeable to the troops, as you can imagine. These are presumably empty cans, given by the way they're carrying them. These shot cards that give a little bit of information. This is, of course, in lieu of there not being any sound, but it gives you a little glimpse about the story here. And this is a really solid shot as well. Troops with helmets on, as is the case in 1916, making their way up what looks like a communications trench, and then preparing for some kind of assault. We'll just pause there for a second. You can see the very clear design of the trenches here. This is a kind of classic trench design with these crenellations, or these turns in the trench. The idea being that it offers protection. One, if somebody was to get into your trench with bad intentions and point a machine gun down it and it was dead straight, obviously you could do a tremendous amount of damage. But secondly, and more importantly, is to protect against artillery. If there was a blast, for example, in the far traverse, the one around that corner, a lot of that damage would get dissipated going around the corners. And so the guys in the near part of the screen, if a shell landed in the traverse in the background there, likely would remain certainly alive, probably not in particularly good condition, and may well have a ringing ears and a banging headache, but not dead. That's the main thing. It's also worth pointing out, you can just see this guy in the foreground here. Can you see the little shoulder title? Let's just put a pause on there. You can just about see a metal title that's known as a shoulder title that all troops would wear, one on each shoulder, and that allows you to identify the unit. I don't know if the resolution is good enough in this shot, but if you were to zoom in, you can see clearly in a kind of arced shape there is some kind of wording. That will be a shortened version of whatever the regiment happens to be, and there's either a letter or a number above it. From this kind of resolution, it looks to me like that may well be a T, and a T would designate them as being territorial troops. So pre-war part-time soldiers who were initially enlisted for home service only, but then you could effectively volunteer to go overseas when the war was declared. But these very likely are territorial troops. Some kind of mini stove or brazier going, very likely for a cup of tea there. Pretty classic for British troops to try and get themselves a cup of tea in a trench. Just a little cubby hole kind of cut out at the side of a trench here. This is a great shot and pretty classic of the story of the First World War. It also allows us to date this film pretty accurately. So we know that, for example, on the 15th September 1916, tanks are used for the very first time in history. And obviously it can't be pre that date. It's also, we know, a 1916 film, so this is likely either just after the Battle of Flers-Courcelette or more likely part of the Battle of the Ancre, and that was 13th of November 1916. We see here an officer in the foreground with his back to us with a cap balanced on his shoulder. We can tell he's an officer because of his uniform, and particularly what we refer to as a Sam Brown, which is this kind of officer's webbing, which is carried at the belt and shoulder strap that's carried around. Would have held his pistol and his map case and various other bits. Slightly different cut of clothing. So probably the tank commander, and needs to be a brave fella because these tanks were extremely difficult to operate in. Incredibly hot, unventilated exhaust in the middle of it. Really a bullet magnet amongst other things, and they come in two varieties. We're looking at a mail tank here, as you can see from this 6-pounder naval gun on the sponson on the side. We can also see from this number here on the side, D20. This tells us this is a tank of D Battalion of the Tank Corps. So this gives us, we could probably track this specific tank in action in November of 1916. But mail tanks have a couple of 6-pounder guns in these things on the side called sponsons. Female tanks would be machine gun only. So they have a slightly different role in action. Troops moving up to the front line, bayonets fixed. We've got a crate of Mills bombs by the looks of things, hand grenades being brought up the line. And these are Mills bombs, but in a different configuration, being used as rifle grenades, getting flung towards the enemy trenches. This looks to me a bit like a legitimate battlefield shot. Some of these films don't always have that kind of thing. Some are legitimate battlefield shots. Some have been made later on. This one's probably battlefield. One of the reasons I say that is if you look down here, you can see these two guys with bayonets fixed, with helmets on, moving up a trench. Now, if you get shots that are not necessarily taken on the battlefield, but rather ones at a stage behind the line, you don't so often see these guys who are not really au fait with kind of how video works at the time, really putting that much effort in. These men are clearly ducking. They're clearly keeping the head below the parapet here. And probably this rise in the background we're looking at is the lip of the German frontline trench. So we're looking out into no man's land here. And you can see explosions going off. These look fairly small. They could be 18-pounders, but I think more likely these are going to be rifle grenades or trench mortars. But I think there's a good chance this is a legitimate battlefield shot. Scottish troops preparing to go over the top. This is a kind of classic shot, a well-known one actually. Just pause that for a second. Really interesting. There's loads of stuff you can bring out here because this is one of those classic moments just before people go over the top, and you get all kinds of a very wide array of individuals, each with their own kind of personal moments here, and we got a little bit of glimpse of all of that. So in the foreground you see an officer there who's checking his watch, presumably synchronizing it with another officer next to him. The three of them wearing helmets, one of them having some damage on the top of his helmet from some previous incident. A lot of men smoking, a couple of them looking at the camera, the videographer, who would be something of a novelty at this time. Even one man about halfway down the trench sitting down there having a smoke just to rest. Maybe he's an old veteran and he's kind of been there and done that before. But they're going to be advancing in just a few moments, kilts and all, and let's have a quick look. So one officer waiting at the back here, making sure that everybody leaves the trench safely and nobody stays behind. And then we've got the camera probably up on the parapet here, capturing these guys going over the top. Rifles only held at the trail or by their sides. I think this shot here, looking at the quality, and this is one of those kind of clues and little giveaways that you sometimes get looking at this footage. When you look at a lot of it, you see this kind of wobbly, raw kind of feeling, and it's just not quite as well framed, not quite as well done, and quite often you can tell that it's been done in something of a hurry. So I think there's a very high chance this is legitimate battlefield footage, showing men going over the top, probably in an attack around Ginchy or Guillemont, two villages that were attacked by the King's Own Scottish borderers in the middle to latter part of the Battle of the Somme. So troops going over here, view of the German front line under a fairly heavy bombardment by the looks of things, and then tricky to make out, but looks like troops attacking across maybe between a field boundary here or across a road possibly, but clearly moving away from the kind of obliquely across the screen from the camera. But I don't think there's any doubt this is legitimate Battle of the Somme combat footage. There's actually a huge number of troops, as you can see, coming into the background here, advancing again obliquely across the screen with that protective artillery barrage ahead of them. That's very likely a friendly barrage, rolling barrage with troops advancing behind it. Again, same sort of thing. Certainly Scottish troops advancing, King's Own Scottish borderers more likely. They're making their way out into no man's land. This is an interesting shot, and worth just a pause for a second. What we saw there, I'd imagine, is a runner coming in, providing a message to this signalling station. So we know from a couple of things here. One, it's been chalked on the sign above this this little dugout, and secondly, there's even a board been put up. And thirdly as well, the man in there who's kind of hunched over a map or a message book is wearing a brassard, an armband, which denotes him as being a signaller. Now, that's important because signallers are a really key member of the battalion. They're very useful on the ground, and this chap here is specifically wearing that armband because it gives him priority of movement. It looks like his job here is relaying messages, but if he was a runner, he would be wearing a similar armband, and it means if you see him coming up or down a trench, you get out of the way because he's got an important message to send. In this case, it looks like the runner's come back to him. He's now marking down that message, and he's going to send it on probably via telephone back to a headquarters, maybe brigade or divisional headquarters, providing a bit of information about the kind of the ongoing battle. And a classic artillery shot here, British 18-pounder guns going about as quick as they can here. They're very quick firing, do something like 10 to 12 rounds a minute for a short period of time. Very, very impressive rate of fire. Presumably now, a couple of minutes later, we're seeing British troops coming back, including a couple of wounded guys, with a lot of captured Germans, so German prisoners here you can see in the middle of the screen. So let's just have a quick pause on there for a second. So we see a number of German soldiers wearing that kind of famous pork pie hat, as it's referred to, and then some guys here wearing a Stahlhelm, or the steel helmet, which is the more typical 1916 onwards headgear that's worn. But certainly these guys have been taken prisoner just a few minutes before, dropped their weapons, dropped most of their kit, and are now being escorted back. Even here, actually, another great shot. You can see two Germans here carrying a wounded British, in fact, two lots of them, carrying wounded British soldiers behind them or in between them. That's quite a usual thing. We would see that quite a lot, actually, as the war unfolds. Clearly a group of officers here. Looks like at least 3 officers, one of whom is using a trench periscope. Great bit of kit, allows you to not get sniped at. You can stick your head over the top of a trench without too much risk and kind of see what's going on with the progress of the attack. Clearly in the same position, cameraman's very likely not moved very far. He's now looking at a stretcher bearer party who are bringing in wounded troops off the battlefield. Still in the same location by the looks of things. Still got that same group of officers looking out, and we can see a bombardment going on in the distance. So reserve waves coming up, very likely to consolidate the newly won ground here. Frontline positions, once they've been captured, actually present quite a few issues. Let's just pause for a second there. I mean, this shot's great. It gives us a couple of clues. One of them is you can just see how important communications are. We can see cables running that have clearly been put up fairly recently, running up towards the front lines. Overground cables really useful because you can get immediate messages back and forth on a kind of very quickly and ever-evolving battlefield. At the same time, though, troops have got to get up, and they have to get up with supplies and reserves and fresh ammunition and all of that kind of material to help the guys who have captured the newly won ground. And there's a couple of reasons for that that are important. And in fact, this one gives us a great example. See this guy here at the back carrying multiple shovels. In fact, loads of these guys are carrying shovels, almost all of them. One of the major concerns that you get is when you capture a German trench, for example, you've got a big problem because the trench is facing in the wrong direction. Trenches are not two-way, they're one-directional. They have what we know as a fire step cut into the front, so a typical trench might be 7 feet tall. They've got a fire step dug into one side, which means you can stand on it in order to get your head and shoulders over the top and then fire out of that trench. Now, if you capture a German trench and you're a Brit, that fire step is dug at the back of your trench. So you're facing the wrong direction. So the only way you can actually use that for defense is then to what they refer to as reverse the trench. Literally dig a step into the back side of it so that it faces the correct direction. That takes time, that takes effort, and it also needs spades and supplies and all of that kind of thing. And of course, the Germans are well aware of this, and so they inevitably launch counterattacks. German counterattack doctrine in the First World War is wait until ground has been captured and then immediately counterattack, because the new occupiers are in a much more vulnerable position. So we see this time and time again. Hence, reserves like these guys coming up with shovels to consolidate newly won ground. So RHA, Royal Horse Artillery, typically lighter artillery batteries. This gives you a little idea of the Somme today is really known as being just a kind of muddy hellhole. And that's true, and it's certainly more true at the end of the battle, but it's not specifically true at the start of the Battle of the Somme. 1st of July 1916, the infamous opening day, is about 27, 28 degrees. It's pretty warm, that's Celsius. So it's a pretty warm day, and the ground isn't too badly churned up at that point. But by the time we get to September and then on it into October and November, when this shot's very likely taken, the ground has been churned up by shell fire and huge amounts of traffic, and of course lots and lots of rain. And so movement gets slowed down an extraordinary amount, and everything just gets more difficult. So an artillery battery moving up to reposition, presumably get back within range, and then put down extra fire for the next phase of the attack. Can capture British and German troops in and around the village of Beaumont-Hamel, which is one of the most bitterly contested parts of the entire battlefield on the Somme. We see it's a bit of an unusual mix, actually. Just pause that for a second there. Something quite odd about this, because I can't see any weapons in the line here. I don't see anybody with a weapon, possibly a few guys on the far bank. And it looks like majority German prisoners in the middle ground here. What's unusual about this is these look like British steel helmets. In fact, I'm pretty certain these are British steel helmets. You can see a German one there for sure, but let's continue on the video slightly, see if we can pick any bits out. Look like German prisoners, but a number of them wearing British steel helmets. If anyone can figure that one out, drop us a message. Classic anti-aircraft, mobile anti-aircraft shot here. This is one of the kind of new inventions of the First World War. Aircraft are brand new, they're only a dozen or so years old by the time the war breaks out, and so anti-aircraft guns of course don't exist. These have to be effectively ad hoc put together with naval guns put onto the back of lorries, but they're really interesting how they work. Actually, they've got some very clever technology behind them. And more prisoners here. We've got a British soldier who is searching German prisoners, and looks like they're taking all of their personal possessions out, and they don't look too happy about the experience either. So photographs, searching for any kind of letters or documents that might well be useful, and presumably what they're picking up now is the stuff they've been told they can keep. So Scottish troops again by the kilts, and we can see them getting their post from home, their letters. And it's worth pointing out the postal system in the First World War is outstandingly good. It's you could write a letter from the UK on a Monday morning, and it's not out of the question that it could be in your hand in a trench in France by Wednesday. There's so much traffic going back and forward across the English Channel that it's absolutely possible. Royal Naval Division here. I just want to pause on this shot for a second because one, they're an interesting unit, and secondly, this looks like a really interesting shot. So the RND, Royal Naval Division, is effectively made up of sailors who, when war is declared, basically don't have a ship. So they're a surplus manpower, and because all the ships are full to complement, the Royal Navy decides that they're going to put a division into the field. So the R&D, Royal Naval Division, serves as an infantry division on the Somme. In fact, they do very, very well. There's a few great little bits about this shot, though. You can see this chap just here. It's a bit tricky to tell, but he is wearing a German Pickelhaube helmet. So that classic spiked helmet, the leather spiked helmet, except this one's got a cover on it. That cover is quite often used on the battlefield, and I can't quite work it out from here. Maybe we can get our editor to enhance this slightly. You can possibly read the number on the front, but that gives the number of the infantry regiment that helmet belonged to. This is kind of classic souveniring behaviour. In fact, there's another Pickelhaube just here. This guy smiling at the camera in the foreground. He's wearing a Pickelhaube without the cover on it. Looks to me like a Prussian eagle on the front there. So effectively 4 different German armies, but the Prussian army is the largest and most powerful one. We've got this guy wearing what looks like a Prussian Pickelhaube, and then his mate over there in the background has also souvenired a Pickelhaube, except it's missing the shako plate, or the plate off the front, that would tell us which part of the German army that came from. A great shot, though. And bear in mind, a lot of these guys, this is going to be their first time on film, maybe ever. Well, there we go. A fascinating look at a real 1916 battlefield film, which I hope you found interesting. If you like deep dives like this, then why not check out our dedicated podcast, Not So Quiet on the Western Front, where each week my co-host Dr. Spencer Jones and I explore different aspects of the First World War on the Western Front. That's all this time. We'll see you again soon.